The $10 trillion lie, why America's farmland is turning to dust. The soil broke first. A black wind tore across a Kansas field at noon, turning the sky to night. The farmer reached for his hat, then froze. The top layer of his land lifted like smoke and vanished. He'd spent a decade paying for machines that were now carving his future into the air. That storm wasn't 1935. It was last spring. Across the plains, fields blew, creeks ran brown, and grain elevators went quiet. To understand why land this rich is turning to dust again, we need to go beneath our feet, to the living engine we've treated like inert dirt for a century. The ground we stand on, what soil really is. Soil isn't dirt. Dirt is what you sweep off the porch. Soil is alive and it's crowded. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, springtails, beetles. A teaspoon can hold more organisms than there are people on Earth. For plants, this isn't trivia, it's plumbing and power. Fungi stretch hyphal threads like fiber optic cables, trading minerals for sugars. Bacteria manufacture natural antibiotics that help roots push back pathogens. This living network is what scientists and farmers mean when they say organic matter. More life means more structure, more water held in place, more resilience when weather snaps. Get this: healthy soil clumps. Those tiny aggregates are like granola, not flour. Water infiltrates instead of racing away. Roots slide deeper. When the wind hits, the surface doesn't just take flight. For decades, the conventional playbook, deep tillage, bare fields, synthetic inputs, treated soil as a medium, not a community. You grow a crop, you add fertilizer, you kill the pests. It worked until it didn't, because every pass of the plow breaks fungal networks. Every bare month burns off carbon. Every heavy rain on uncovered ground blows apart the granola into powder. Meanwhile, something else was happening behind the yield numbers. Farmers noticed their fields crusting after storms. Tractor tires left ruts where water used to soak. Irrigation had to start earlier in the season to keep seedlings alive. Yields still looked fine until a dry year. Then the good ground separated from the fragile ground, and that fragility had a price that didn't show up on the seed invoice. To understand why, we need to go back to the last time fields blew so hard the sky went black. In the 1930s Dust Bowl, grasslands were plowed for wheat across a region that rarely sees more than 20 inches of rain. With roots gone, drought arrived, and the wind finished the job. Black blizzards rolled all the way to the East Coast. By the early 1940s, recovery came with basic changes: shelter belts, contouring, grass restored. The lesson wasn't mystical. Keep cover on the land, keep roots in the ground, keep structure intact. Here's where it gets tricky. Post-war agriculture scaled up. Bigger tractors, bigger fields, fewer fences and trees. Tillage got faster. Chemicals took pressure off rotation. The calculus made sense in a world of cheap fuel and stable rain. But the biology didn't change. The organisms that build aggregates don't care about commodity prices. Bare is bare, disturbance is disturbance. Over time, conventional systems lost organic matter. Research has documented that trend, while long-term organic and regenerative systems built it. With less organic matter, soils hold less water. In a drought, plants stress earlier. In a downpour, more soil leaves the field. Across the country, a new generation of farmers started testing a different approach. Cover crops seeded after harvest to keep living roots year-round. Reduced tillage, sometimes none. Livestock back on cropland to cycle nutrients. They weren't guessing. They were responding to what their fields were telling them. In trials and on farms, organic matter rose, water infiltration improved, and disease pressure changed. A farmer in a SARE project saw reduced nitrogen needs without yield drag when he layered covers with smarter timing. Another used biofumigant brassicas to manage soil-borne disease in nursery crops while cutting chemical exposure for workers. These aren't slogans, they're methods. But there was one problem: time. Building soil is like compounding interest. The first year feels slow, the fifth year surprises you. Meanwhile, bills are monthly. Crop insurance rewards planting on time, not waiting for a cover crop to finish. Grain buyers don't pay a premium for infiltration rates, and debt doesn't bend for rain. So many producers stayed on the treadmill: rip, plant, spray, harvest, repeat. If the weather held, the spreadsheet worked. If the weather broke, costs exploded. What nobody knew at the time, because no one had incentive to measure it, was the hidden balance sheet. When a field loses a tenth of an inch of topsoil to wind or water, what's the value of that lost capacity? How do you price the future yield that won't happen because a fungal network was shredded? How do you value the flood that sent nitrate into a creek because there was nothing living to sip it? We don't book those losses, so they don't look real. But the farmer in Kansas feels them when he has to roll a pivot one more week, and the county feels them when culverts choke with silt. Now remember, this isn't about purity. Nobody is suggesting we go back to hand hose and horse teams. The question is whether the ground we stand on can keep doing the job we're asking of it under the current system. The science says healthy soil is more than chemistry, it's structure, biology, and time. The history says when we ignore that, wind and water take what we thought we owned. Everything is about to get more personal, because the bill for degradation doesn't arrive as a line item, it arrives as a storm, a drought, a field that suddenly stops forgiving small mistakes. And once the top layer leaves, it doesn't come back on a delivery truck. The race for yield, the incentive that broke the land. Start with a simple decision. A farmer has two seed options. One promises 5 extra bushels with a higher nitrogen bill and a stiffer stalk that stands for late harvest. The other is cheaper, mid-yield, better on low fertility. The banker likes the first option because crop insurance uses yield history. A higher yield this year nudges the guarantee next year. That's not just agronomy, it's collateral. The push for yield came with a promise, more grain, more security, but the promise had a clause. To chase it, fields had to be cleaned, leveled, and managed like factories, fall tillage to bury residue, spring tillage to warm soil, fertilizer pre-plant, pesticide on schedule, harvest to the fence line. Fence rows came out. Shelter belts were cut because GPS can plant straighter when nothing breaks the line. Windbreaks don't earn in a spreadsheet, but they stop wind. When they vanish, the wind doesn't. Meanwhile, markets narrowed. Corn, soy, wheat. Rotation got shorter because the elevator paid for what it could store and ship. The agronomic rotation that broke pest cycles was replaced by a financial rotation. Plant the crop with the best forward contract. It worked until the pests adapted to the plan and the weather didn't. Here's where the incentives hardened. Subsidies weren't a villain. They were designed to stabilize farm income. But stability indexed to yield makes the safest bet look like the most aggressive one. If your neighbor hits 230 bushels, your 190 isn't just lower, it's riskier, because the guarantee that underwrites your loan lives in last year's average. You don't get paid for infiltration rates or organic matter percentage. You get paid for grain. So decisions stacked up on the side of outputs. Bigger headers to harvest faster, more horsepower to beat the rain, preemptive herbicides because one flush of weeds can clip 10 bushels and a dock at the elevator. Insurance deadlines that reward planting into ground that should have waited 2 days to dry. Each choice makes sense in isolation. Together, they create bare weeks and brittle structure. That's the space where erosion starts. Get this, yields genuinely rose, hybrids improved, planters singulated, variable rate tech cut waste. For a while, everyone won, but while the top line climbed, the base eroded. On silt loams that once soaked 2 inches of rain, stormwater began to sheet. In the western plains, aquifers carried the stress. Irrigation masked soils lost sponge. Costs crept, more nitrogen to feed the same crop, more fungicide to cover a canopy stressed by poor airflow after compacted passes, more diesel to pull through tight ground. The race for yield was also a race against time. A micro story from Iowa. A producer rips soybean residue in fall to get a jump on spring. Snowmelt comes with a warm rain. The top 2 inches flow into the road ditch. He calls it gumbo. He also books an extra pass of starter fertilizer. The field still makes 72 bushels. On paper, a win. In the ditch, 4 inches of silt. Downstream, a creek runs brown for 3 days. Unknown to him, across the county line, a neighbor plants rye after corn. Spring is a muddle, wet then windy. He crimp rolls the rye, plants beans green. Yields come in at 68. The banker raises an eyebrow, but his field doesn't crust. He skips a post-emerge herbicide pass. He saves 1 irrigation cycle. The 4-bushel gap is a fight over a season. The system he's building is. His soil gets a little darker, a little spongier. By year 5, the 68 is 74 on the slopes that used to burn out. But the guarantee on paper trails the guy who spiked 80 in a wet year. Here's the trap. The race sets the pace of degradation. Input dealers are not villains. They fill needs farmers feel. Seed companies breed for standability and yield. Ag retailers provide services on schedules that match risk windows. Everyone in the chain solves for output. The missing metric is the future capacity of the land. And then weather shifts turn incentives into liabilities. A late May deluge on bare-tilled ground scours to subsoil. A June heat dome hits shallow-rooted corn, pivots spin non-stop. A September windstorm meets a monoculture with no windbreaks. Thousands of acres lodge. Each event is unlucky. Together, they're a map of fragility built by policy, finance, and habit. To understand how incentives break land, follow the money. Counties that maximize planted acres show higher gross sales, which support land values. High land values increase debt loads, which require high guarantees, which require high yields. High yields reward practices that are fast and scale-friendly, which favor bare periods and full-width tillage. Bare periods and full-width tillage reduce organic matter, which reduces water resilience. Reduced resilience makes weather more expensive, which increases insurance claims, which tightens deadlines, which pushes planting faster into poor conditions. The loop closes. The way out isn't a romantic reset, it's a new race with different prizes. Pay for water held, not just grain hauled. Reward multi-year rotation stability, not single-year spikes. Let insurance recognize soil health as risk reduction. The moment the scoreboard changes, decisions change. Until then, the black wind that farmer met at noon will keep finding fields where the numbers penciled, but the biology didn't. The Ogallala Warning, pumping ancient water for modern harvests. The first thing you hear is the pivot, a low hum, then a hiss as nozzles wake up. In western Kansas, Nebraska's Panhandle, the Texas High Plains, that sound is summer insurance. It also comes with a clock. The water feeding those jets isn't rain saved from last month. It's ancient, locked underground long before tractors, long before townships drew section lines. Farmers call it the Ogallala. Geologists call it a fossil aquifer. Either way, it doesn't refill on human schedules. Here's where it gets specific. The aquifer sprawls beneath 8 states, a shallow ocean of sand and gravel holding freshwater that made the Great Plains farmable at industrial scale. When corn crowds July heat, a pivot buys time. When wheat heads during a dry wind, a pivot saves a crop. But every hour the pump runs, the needle drops. In some counties, meters show declines measured in feet per year. In others, the water is already gone. Wells that hit strong at 600 gallons a minute now cough at 200, then 80, then nothing. Stakes, real people. A third-generation producer in southwest Kansas watches pressure gauges like pulse monitors. If he can't keep canopy cool during a 5-day heat dome, plants spiral. Kernels abort. Insurance pays for yield loss, not for the year you lose a well. The banker knows a quarter without water sells for less than the field across the road with a strong pump. Land values split along invisible lines. Families split with them. One son keeps the home place, the other moves east chasing rain. What nobody put in the spreadsheet is how soil health and water draw are coupled. When fields are tilled bare, the top 4 inches bake and seal. The first half inch of a storm skitters away. That lost infiltration has to be replaced by pumping later. When soil organic matter drops, its water-holding capacity shrinks. A single point of organic matter can hold tens of thousands of gallons per acre. Lose 2 points, you've traded a rain event for diesel. Action on the ground looks like this. June, 3 p.m., temperatures over 100, wind at 20. A center pivot traces its arc. Beneath it, roots stay shallow because compacted layers push them sideways. Sensors show stress even with water on. A mile away, a field with 5 years of covers and no-till holds a cooler canopy by late afternoon. That producer still irrigates, but he starts at dawn, not midnight, and spins slower. He's using water the aquifer will never see again at a slower rate, because his topsoil stores more between passes. Meanwhile, something else is happening upstream and down. Municipalities tap into the same system. Town wells drop, treatment costs climb, and residents complain about water taste. River flows thin where springs once fed them. In dry years, local creeks become lines of cottonwoods with no water to reflect. When the aquifer dips below pump intakes, it's not a pause, it's a permanent haircut. You don't just drill deeper into sand with no recharge and expect a comeback. This was the moment everything changed for a county in the Texas Panhandle. The year started wet, planting was early, then came a 40-day dry stretch with record heat. Pivots ran non-stop, power bills spiked, 24 wells failed mid-season, fields were chopped for silage, the feed yard paid pennies on the dollar. The immediate impact was obvious: revenue gone. The ripples were quieter. A machinist lost winter overhaul work, a school board delayed roof repairs, a Main Street cafe closed a day a week. To understand why policy matters here, go back to incentives. Water rights were set when the aquifer felt endless. Use it or lose it, provisions nudged pumping out of fear, the paper right would vanish unused. Crop insurance guaranteed revenue on thirsty corn, but offered less certainty for sorghum or wheat that sip less. Seed genetics favored high-yield corn hybrids that shine with uniform water, not crops that roll with stress. So wells spun. The year they couldn't, everyone saw how exposed they were. Get this, farmers are adapting. Some shift acres from corn to cotton or milo. Others split pivots, watering only high-reward slices, leaving corners to prairie strips or grazing. A few form local water districts that set pumping limits everyone hates but abides, because the alternative is a ghost map of abandoned circles. They try deficit irrigation, less water at the right stage, more later. They invest in low-energy precision application, drop nozzles closer to the ground, cut wind drift. These choices buy seasons, maybe years. But there was one problem: without soil that holds moisture, even the best tech is a bandage. A thunderstorm that soaks an inch into a spongy profile is worth 2 on a sealed one. Cover roots open channels. Fungal threads stitch particles into crumbs that don't slake. Residue shades the surface, dropping soil temperature few degrees that matter. It's agronomy as water policy, quiet, slow, and compounding, the only kind that helps when the reservoir is older than the county courthouse. In the aftermath of the Panhandle's bad year, a farmer who lost 3 wells walked his father's fields. He stopped at a shelter belt planted in the 1950s, a remnant spared by GPS swathes. The wheat there held longer. Snow had drifted deeper all winter, melting slow into spring. Wind had run high above the treetops, not across bare rows. That strip wasn't nostalgia. It was a working memory from an era that knew how to keep water where it fell. The warning isn't subtle. We've been mining a savings account we didn't build. The Ogallala is finite on human timelines. The only lever we control is how hard we pull on the pump and how well the soil holds what little rain comes. The choice isn't between technology and biology. It's whether they work together fast enough to keep the pivots from going silent before the next generation steps onto the porch and listens for that hum. The $10 trillion exposure, how finance sits on the soil. Start with a balance sheet, not a field. The number that underwrites rural America isn't yield, it's land value. Banks lend against it. Insurers price risk from it. Pensions and IITs treat it like a bond that grows corn. Now put a finger on the real collateral, the top 8 inches. Strip the biology and structure from that layer, and the number on the appraisal quietly loosens like a fence post after spring floods. Here's where the exposure hides. U.S. farmland is valued in the trillions. Every mortgage, every equipment loan pinned to that ground assumes a certain future capacity to produce cash flow, rents, crop sales, tax assessments. But future capacity isn't a line of best fit. It's the ability of soil to hold water, cycle nutrients, and resist loss. When organic matter slips and infiltration slows, cash flow stability erodes before anyone updates a spreadsheet. A streak of bad weather years looks like volatility. Underneath, it's degraded resilience. Stakes: think of a county bank with a portfolio of operating lines secured by acres appraised at peak values. A 3-year run of drought and flood exposes a pattern: higher input bills to chase the same yields, rising insurance claims, then a couple of farms that restructure. The bank tightens terms. A dealer sees fewer new tractors on order. Land rents soften. Appraisers shuffle comparables that are already stale because the soil isn't what it was when the last sale closed. That slide doesn't hit a headline. It lands in a kitchen at tax time. Action on Wall Street looks cleaner but carries the same dirt. Asset managers bundle farmland into funds marketed as inflation hedges. The pitch is simple: people eat in recessions, but the NOI they project assumes stable operating costs and weather risk contained by insurance. Insurance, though, pays after loss. It doesn't rebuild granular structure. It can't restore an aquifer's pressure or stitch a fungal web. If claim patterns trend up because soils hold less, premiums follow. As coverage costs climb, cap rates shrink. The safe asset becomes a question: safe for whom and for how long? Meanwhile, something else is happening in bond markets. Municipalities issue debt for drainage, roads, and water treatment. When fields shed soil and nutrients, creeks silt, culverts clog, nitrates rise, and plants spend more to meet standards. Those costs ride on local taxes. A town that once budgeted for snowplows now quietly budgets for dredging and filters. If the farm base weakens, so does the tax base. Ratings agencies watch trends, not anecdotes, and trend lines follow water. What nobody priced fully is correlation risk. Degraded soil amplifies weather into a systemic event. A heat dome over a region with shallow roots forces simultaneous irrigation draws, spiking energy demand and water stress, shrinking margins across dozens of counties at once. A stalled front dumps inches over bare tilled ground, carving gullies from Nebraska to Missouri, silting rivers, slowing barge traffic, nudging commodity basis wider. That ripple touches traders, insurers, lenders, and city budgets. It's not climate alone, it's how land is prepared to meet it. Get this: mortgage math depends on appraisals that assume comp productivity, but comps don't measure living function, they measure last year's optimism. The day fields blow, a neighbor's auction sets a new floor. A family with a 60% loan-to-value ratio becomes 75 overnight without missing a payment. Covenants tighten. A renewal conversation shifts from interest rate to collateral. One more bad year, and a farm that never missed a note becomes special assets, managed by a department that doesn't know the North 40's wet spot, only the spreadsheet's red cells. Microstory: a retired teacher's pension fund owns a slice of a farmland REIT. Her statement shows steady dividends. 2 dry summers later, operating partners renegotiate rents, citing wells that lost pressure and fields that crusted after a storm. The dividend trims a hair. She shrugs. Then a municipality in the same region raises water rates and issues new debt for upgrades. Property taxes creep. Quietly, her cost of living meets the farmland's hidden losses. So what's the number? You won't see a consensus that pins an exact figure to soil degradation's financial drag. But the exposure spans asset classes: farmland valuations, equipment finance, crop insurance reserves, municipal bonds, energy demand for pumping, downstream navigation costs, health costs from water contamination. Stack them, and you're staring at a levered bet on topsoil function. The label on the fund says real assets. The fine print says if the ground holds. There's a way to de-risk without shrinking acres. Lenders can discount rates for verified soil health improvements, cover crop acres, reduce tillage, measured infiltration, because those borrowers default less when weather swings. Insurers can cut premiums where practices reduce claims. Appraisers can add a soil function line item and stop pretending 2 fields with different organic matter are equal. Municipalities can co-fund upstream covers rather than buy bigger filters. Grain buyers can offer contracts that pay for stability, not just volume. Here's the quiet truth: finance doesn't need to save the planet. It just has to stop mispricing the ground. When dollars reward living function, practices shift fast. The risk is real, the exposure wide, and the fix boring. Keep armor on the soil, keep roots in year-round, disturb less, rebuild the sponge. That's not a slogan, it's collateral management. The metrics that lied: bushels masking collapse. On paper, the numbers looked great. County yield averages crept higher, 5-year trend lines pointed up, and the local elevator added another bin. Those metrics told a smooth story: more bushels, more efficiency, more security. But bushels are a rearview mirror. They don't measure whether the soil can take one more shock without cracking. They don't show the cost of holding the line. Here's what the spreadsheet missed. Yield is a snapshot, resilience is a film. You can post a record harvest while the rooting depth shrinks, the infiltration rate halves, and the organic matter slips 1/10 of a point every season. The field still performs until a weather punch lands, and then you learn what the metric didn't say. It's like bragging about miles per hour while the fuel gauge quietly heads for E. Stakes got personal in boardrooms and kitchens. Bankers judged farms by average yield and operating margin. Crop insurance set guarantees off past bushels. Land appraisers pulled comps from recent sales that reflected grain checks, not water-holding capacity. Farmers chasing a higher APH planted earlier, sprayed sooner, ran bigger iron because the metric rewarded speed. Meanwhile, the living structure that turns rain into yield eroded grain by grain, uncounted. Action looked like progress. Precision ag sharpened placement, seed tech stacked traits, equipment cut overlap to inches, yet the baseline crept, more nitrogen to hit the same number, more fungicide to cover stressed canopies, more herbicide to beat resistance that thrived in short rotations. Costs rose invisibly beneath the yield curve, like debt under a soaring stock. If the weather cooperated, margins survived. If it blinked, they didn't. Impact showed up only when the system hiccuped. A 2-inch rain on full-tilled slopes carved rills the map didn't track. A mild drought forced 3 extra irrigation cycles in June that no metric captured as soil loss. A harvest windstorm toppled corn in counties that had removed shelter belts years ago to speed planting. Each incident got coded as weather. The pattern, fragility, never made the report. Get this: bushels can rise while water quality falls. Streams turned brown after storms. Nitrates climbed downstream. Municipal plants spent more to meet standards. Those costs sit off farm, off ledger. When a town raises rates, the farmer sees a utility bill, not the missing sponge that used to catch April rain. The metric that mattered to him, yield, said nothing about the bill he helped create. Meanwhile, something else was hiding in the averages. High performers masked the slide. Bottom fields, thin knobs, compacted headlands, sandy slices, underperformed and got subsidized by the flats. The county average ticked up because the best acres got better with tech. The worst acres got worse with disturbance. Aggregated, it looked fine. Disaggregated, it was a slow leak. What nobody priced in was time lag. Soil responds like a trust fund. You can overspend for years and still look solvent. Then a dry August exposes shallow roots. A pounding May exposes weak aggregates. The collapse feels sudden. It took a decade. The metric was honest about short-term output and silent about long-term capacity. Micro-story: a co-op agronomist runs infiltration tests for a field day. 2 rings, same soil type. 1 minute on a no-till, cover-cropped strip, water sinks, stopwatch clicks. On the tilled check, the water stands, glistens, then crusts. Farmers murmur, nod, snap photos. Harvest comes. The tilled strip beats the cover by 3 bushels. The crowd remembers the number, not the stopwatch. Next spring's storm remembers the stopwatch. The fix isn't to ditch metrics. It's to measure what matters when weather turns. Infiltration rates alongside yield. Soil organic matter trends next to APH. Evapotranspiration savings from residue and cover. Rooting depth indicators the banker can recognize. If the guarantee accounts for living function, the race stops rewarding practices that burn it. Here's the quiet pivot. The minute dollars attached to resilience metrics, behavior shifts. Insurers shave premiums for verified cover crop acres. Lenders trim rates for reduced tillage and documented water savings. Grain buyers add a steady supply bonus for farms that ride heat domes without claims. Those are still bushels, but now they're bushels backed by a sponge. Until that happens, the black wind will keep grading our math with a blunt pencil. Dust Bowl 2 echoes with a modern twist. Call it a rhyme, not a repeat. In the 1930s, the plow ripped prairie sod, drought arrived, and the wind found its opening. Black blizzards carried soil to the Atlantic. Recovery came when shelter belts rose and grass returned. Today, the sky still goes dark in places, but the storm looks different. It's not one decade-long disaster. It's a series of sharp hits amplified by how we farm. Start with the fields. Then, deep tillage, summer fallow, bare ground across whole counties. Now, fewer shelter belts, wider equipment, longer bare windows because speed pays. Then, wheat on marginal land. Now, corn and soy pushed west with irrigation and short rotations that keep roots shallow and residues thin. The trigger, drought, hasn't changed. The amplifiers have. In the 30s, the wind found exposed soil. Today, it finds exposed soil plus compacted layers, plus heat-stressed canopies, plus drained wetlands that once slowed water and trapped silt. A modern dust event doesn't always start with a drought year. It can start with a good year followed by an impulsive fall tillage window, a mild winter with little snow cover, and a dry, gusty March. County roads film over with soil like someone sifted cocoa across the map. The farmer who watched his top-inch drift last spring wasn't unlucky. He was standing in a system that prefers bare ground for efficiency. GPS swathes don't curve around trees. Trees went. Here's where the twist gets personal. Chemicals masked the need for rotation, and irrigation masked the need for sponge. That bought decades. It also hid the slow leak. In the Dust Bowl, failure was obvious. Fields blew, crops died, families left. Now failure slips in sideways, more passes to hold the same yield, more pumping to keep the same canopy, more flash floods where a 1-inch rain once soaked. You can hit a record harvest in September and lose a millimeter of topsoil in May. The ledger balances until it doesn't. Meanwhile, something else is happening on the edges. Towns downwind clean filters after spring winds. Creeks run brown after every thunderstorm, not just the big one. Road ditches fill with silt that used to be someone's fertility. Those losses don't carry a crop insurance code. They carry invoices to county budgets and quiet health warnings when nitrates spike. The modern Dust Bowl isn't a single region on a 193's map. It's a patchwork of hotspots that light up when weather and practice align. What nobody wants to say out loud is that we removed many of the fixes the 1930s taught. Shelter belts, ripped because a 40-foot boom hates trees. Contour strips, smoothed for speed. Perennial covers along waterways, narrowed to gain a few acres of rows. Those weren't foolish decisions. They were rational under a scoreboard that valued acres planted and hours saved. The wind doesn't care about the scoreboard. Get this, there are counterexamples hiding in plain sight. A county that kept shelter belts finds snow stacked higher all winter, moisture banked into spring, and fewer brownouts when March winds rise. A farm that runs cover crops and no-till watches a dust storm roll over the road and not lift from between its rows. That's not ideology, it's physics. Aggregates resist shearing. Residue slows wind at the surface. Roots knit the top inch so it doesn't fly. But there was one problem. Our modern twist adds heat. In the 1930s, drought plus wind stripped fields. Now heat domes push soil temperatures past the comfort zone of microbes that build structure. Bare ground hits 120 degrees. Biology idles. The next rain can't glue crumbs back together because the workforce is stunned. That's why timing matters. Keep living roots in shoulder seasons, keep armor on during heat, reduce disturbance when microbes are active. It's not a vibe, it's a schedule. Micro story, 3 days earlier, a farmer in eastern Colorado rolled down his lane at dawn. He stopped where an old hedgerow still stood, a ragged, half-mile line of trees his grandfather planted after government men came with shovels in 1935. Snow had lingered there into April. On the leeward side, wheat tillers were thicker, soil darker. He knows those trees cost him seconds on every pass. He also knows his neighbor's field across the section blew last March, and his didn't. This was the moment everything changed in a Nebraska county after a spring cyclone. Plowed ground scoured, fields under rye covers scuffed but held. The local paper ran 2 photos side by side. At the co-op meeting, no one argued climate or politics. They argued time. Could they seed covers and still plant on time? Could they leave a few windbreaks and still run 60-foot bars? The answer wasn't easy. It was possible. In the aftermath, some made a small pivot, strip, till instead of full-till rye ahead of soybeans, narrow prairie strips across prevailing winds, a few hedgerows spared. Not perfect. Better, Dust Bowl 2 won't be a sepia photograph. It'll be a balance sheet bleeding slowly, a creek that never runs clear after storms, a pivot that runs more hours for the same grain. Or if we keep the fixes that work, it'll be a shrug when the wind rises because the ground stays put. When it rains, it pours, floods, tiles, and nutrient loss. The storm didn't look special on radar, just a bright band crawling east. By midnight, 3 inches fell on fields that had been bare since fall tillage. By dawn, water ran like sheets of glass. It didn't soak. It slid, gathering soil as it went, turning ditches into chocolate rivers. Downstream, a creek swelled fast, brown and foaming, carrying this year's fertility away before the crop ever saw it. Stakes were immediate. A family counted on that field to cash flow the new planter. Now the top quarter-inch, where the biology lives, was in a culvert. The co-op truck would still bring fertilizer, but it would arrive as a replacement, not an investment. The county would scrape silt off a low-water bridge. The town would treat water for sediment and nitrates. None of those bills say storm tax. but that's what they are. Here's where tiles enter the story. Across the Midwest, farmers laid perforated pipes under fields to do one job: get water off fast enough to plant on time and keep roots out of drowning conditions. Tiles work. They lower the water table, dry topsoil, and widen planting windows. But the speed that saves a spring also launches nutrients downstream. Dissolved nitrates, invisible in the clear water leaving a tile outlet, move straight into creeks. Phosphorus rides with eroded particles when surface runoff hits. When those loads meet warm river water, algae blooms. Far away, in a different state, a dead zone grows each summer where a river meets the sea. Action at the edge of a field looks like this. A tile outlet gushes clear water after a storm. The farmer nods, he can run the planter tomorrow. That same hour, a stream gauge spikes. A reservoir manager opens a gate. A water plant blends sources to dilute nitrate. Parents get a note: infants shouldn't drink tap water until levels drop. The farmer didn't intend any of this. He needed a dry seedbed. The system was built to solve for days, not for months. Meanwhile, something else was happening beneath those tiles. When soils lose organic matter and structure, the pore network simplifies: less sponge, more pipes. Rain either stands and runs off or drops straight to tile. Both roots skip the slow filters: roots, microbes, aggregates. The result is a paradox: fields that either flood too fast or drain too fast, with very little held in place. The hour after a storm becomes everything. The day after matters less. Get this, there are ways to keep tiles and lose less. Cover crops, sip late-season nitrates before frost, then release them back when they decompose. Deeper roots open channels that slow water, spreading it across more pore space. Bioreactors, simple woodchip trenches at tile outlets, feed microbes that turn nitrate into harmless nitrogen gas. Saturated buffers use vegetation to pull nutrients as tile water spreads into a strip before rejoining a ditch. None of these erase the need to plant on time. They cushion the rush. Micro-story from Ohio: 3 miles of tile under 600 acres, corn after corn. Spring is wet. The farmer plants between showers. June brings a gully washer. Tile runs strong. 2 weeks later, the county emails nitrate alerts. The farmer calls his agronomist. They seed rye on half the acres after harvest. Next spring, the rye fields green up early, drink the soil solution, and the tile runs slower with lower nitrate tests. The corn yields 2 bushels less. The water tests change a lot more than the yields. But there was one problem: phosphorus doesn't dissolve as readily. It often leaves attached to particles. That means surface runoff and erosion still drive losses. Bare soil slakes and breaks, sending tiny bits toward the nearest low spot. That's where structure matters. Aggregates resist breakup. Residue slows water at the surface, letting it enter rather than sprint. Strippy till leaves a band for warm soil and an interrow of armor. It's not pretty in a calendar photo. It's effective in a downpour. What nobody ties together at the co-op counter is how floodplains and field edges connect costs. A mile of buffer along a creek can capture sediment that would have filled a brown lake twice. A wetland restored in a field corner turns a nuisance into a sump that holds a flash rain, meters it out, and drops sediment before it leaves. Towns pay for dredging and filtration. Counties pay for gravel to refill washed-out roads. Farms pay for replacement fertility. The cheapest fix sits where water starts, not where it ends. Impact shows up months later. The same fields that flushed nutrients in spring bake in July because the sponge is thin. Tiles that kept roots from drowning now drain every shower too quickly, forcing pivots to run. Diesel covers for capacity the soil once provided free. If you've lost a point of organic matter, you've lost the water equal to a modest summer storm. Multiply that by a county, and you're pumping a river out of the ground to replace what ran away. The shift is boring and proven. Keep living roots through winter. Leave residue. Reduce disturbance so aggregates survive the first hard rain. Install bioreactors and saturated buffers where tiles exit. Seed prairie strips on contours to slow sheet flow. Put a few trees back where the wind and water run. None of this is theory. It's what farmers funded by programs focused on sustainability test, measure, and refine with real-world constraints. In the aftermath of that ordinary storm, the farmer walked his headlands. He could see where the water started running, not where it ended. He circled 2 outlets in his notebook: bioreactor, buffer. He penciled rye ahead of beans. He called the neighbor who'd done it for 5 years and asked about timing. The rain will come again. The choice is whether it takes the field with it. The hidden subsidy web, paying for the problem we created. Follow the money and you'll find the ruts. The checks that keep farms alive also keep fields bare at the wrong times. None of this was designed to fail, it was designed to stabilize. But stabilization tied to volume and speed ends up subsidizing the very practices that make land brittle. Start with crop insurance. It's the backbone. Premiums are discounted because taxpayers cover a chunk. Guarantees are pegged to average yields, so higher yields mean higher guarantees. That's logical protection for farmers in a risky trade. It also tilts decisions. Planting earlier, even into tacky soil, keeps APH strong. Spraying pre-emerge on schedule guards the yield curve. Tilling in fall guarantees a dry, warm seedbed in April. Each move preserves the metric that secures the loan. The public pays part of the premium, then pays again when claims rise after weather slams a fragile field. Then come commodity programs, the floor prices and payments that smooth out ugly markets. They keep lights on. They also reward acres and output on a handful of crops. Wheat, corn, soy win shelf space. Diverse rotations don't. A farmer doing small grains with a clover under seed or grazing covers may lower risk on the land, but not on paper. The safety net is woven around bushels, not the sponge that produces them. Meanwhile, conservation programs exist and they help. Producers apply for cost share to seed covers, fence for rotational grazing, plant buffers. The line is long, funding is finite. Even when approved, the payments arrive as projects, not as a new rule set for risk. A farmer can grow rye on 200 acres with help and still be penalized by a crop insurance deadline that disallows a delayed termination in a wet spring. The right hand plants armor. The left hand writes a policy that punishes wearing it too long. Here's where local incentives quietly join. Counties assess land value off comparable sales driven by yields. High valuations raise tax bases and school budgets. No one wants that to slide. So county boards favor drainage permits, faster roads for bigger equipment, and clean ditches, everything that accelerates water off fields. That helps planting windows and keeps taxable value up. It also sends storms downhill at speed, where towns pay to filter and dredge. The subsidy is hidden. Public dollars chase the downstream consequences. Suppliers aren't the villains, they're part of the web. Financing bundles fertilizer in spring and carries it to harvest with low interest. Seed discounts kick in when you stack traits and acres. Herbicide programs rebate when you stay in a chemistry family. These deals reduce cash stress. They also narrow options. If you want to cut one pass because a thick rye mat suppresses weeds, you'll likely lose the rebate. The spreadsheet says keep the program. The soil says keep the cover. A micro story from the Dakotas. A farmer qualifies for cost share to plant multi-species covers on 600 acres. He's excited until his insurance agent warns that if he doesn't terminate on the date set for his zone, he could jeopardize coverage. Spring is cold. The cover lags. Terminating on time leaves a thin mat. A wind event in May lifts soil between rows. He files a claim. Taxpayers write part of the check. Everyone shrugs weather. The design paid for armor, then fined him for wearing it properly. What nobody prices is the stacked subsidy. First, crop insurance cushions the yield hit from a system that bleeds resilience. Second, disaster aid arrives after the big ones, floods, drought, covering losses in brittle counties. Third, local governments fund ditch cleanouts, culvert upgrades, and water treatment that manage runoff. Fourth, federal conservation programs pay to rebuild a portion of the sponge lost to the first three. It's a loop funded by the same wallet. Get this, when policy pays for practices that reduce risk, costs fall across the web. A county with cover crop adoption sees fewer road washouts after the same storms. An insurer sees lower prevent plant claims when residue protects soil from crusting. A co-op sells fewer emergency passes because weeds are suppressed under armor. Even the energy co-op wins when pivots run fewer hours because the soil holds more between rains. None of that shows up if the scoreboard only reads bushels. Meanwhile, something else is happening in places that tweak the rules. Some insurers pilot premium discounts for verified covers and reduced till. Lenders shave points off loans for farms with documented infiltration gains. Grain buyers offer steady supply bonuses for regenerative rotations that ride heat without claims. These are tiny shifts, but they align cash with capacity, not just output. Farmers respond. They always have, to weather, markets, and policy. But there's one problem: transition risk. The first 2 years of change can clip yields or complicate timing. Bills don't care. That's where subsidies can actually do their job, bridge the gap between a brittle baseline and a resilient system. Front-load support for covers, give schedule flexibility on termination, recognize living roots as risk reduction in insurance, and adjust deadlines to weather, not calendars. Make shelter belts eligible for a maintenance credit, not a penalty to field efficiency. The web won't vanish. It'll either keep paying for fragility or start paying for function. Right now, we subsidize speed and bare ground, then subsidize the cleanup. We can choose to subsidize the sponge instead. The breakers, farmers who left the treadmill. They didn't announce it. They just stopped doing the thing that kept breaking their fields. In North Missouri, a father and daughter parked the chisel plow and seeded cereal rye behind corn. Neighbors called it a fad. The first spring, the planter hairpinned through damp residue and the stand looked ragged. She walked the rows at dusk, wondering if they'd made a mistake. Then June hit hot. Their field stayed cool under a mat of rye. They skipped one irrigation cycle. At harvest, they matched the county average with one fewer herbicide pass. The banker didn't clap. He didn't need to. The math did. In the Texas Panhandle, a cattleman with 2 weak wells sold a third of his corn ground and put cows on covers instead. He let sorghum stand through winter, drilled a mix of brassicas and small grains, and mob grazed the strip at high density for short bursts. The first year, the mud around waterers drove him mad. The second year, the cattle moved faster, feed bills thinned, and the top inch stayed in place through a March blow. He didn't beat his old corn yield. He changed the game that required it. Meanwhile, in eastern Washington, a wheat grower who had burned stubble for decades switched to crimp roller and diverse covers between rotations. The slopes told him if he was right. After spring gully washer, he walked to the toe of a hill where he used to shovel soil off the road. It was clear. Up top, the surface looked like granola, not flour. He still sprayed when needed. He still fertilized. He just stopped resetting the soil to zero every fall. These aren't saints. They're mechanics of living systems. They learned to read infiltration the way their grandfathers read clouds. They tracked organic matter like a vital sign. They timed termination with soil temp, not just a calendar. They made mistakes and kept records. One Iowa farmer planted soybeans green into head-high rye and watched slugs thin a stand. He adjusted, later termination, a different seed treatment, a little more starter. Year 3, the field carried through a violent June with no crusting. His neighbors tilled field rilled. He didn't cheer, he noted. Yet this cash flow changed as much as agronomy. A Kentucky nursery operation that used biofumigant brassicas saw disease pressure drop and worker exposure risk fall. Insurance premiums didn't shift overnight, but downtime did. A rice farmer who flooded fields with fish reported lower pest loads and a new revenue stream. Unconventional, sure. Profitable, on the right acres, with the right timing, yes. They all leaned on small grants and shared experiments, because trying new things burns cash before it saves it. Micro story from the Dakotas: a young couple took over 800 acres of thin, wind-prone ground. They planted a 5-species cover after wheat, then winter grazed it with rented cows. The cows paid for the seed, the manure paid for spring nitrogen. The next corn crop looked ordinary from the road. In August, a dry spell hit. Their leaves rolled later than the neighbor's. They finished at 168 bushels on land that had made 140. They weren't heroes. They were stubborn about roots. What nobody sees from the highway is the second-order change. Risks spread out. With covers and grazing, they added checks from cattle, not just grain. With small grains in rotation, they broke pest cycles and freed up an earlier window to establish covers. With shelter belts restored in a few strategic lines, they lost a sliver of field efficiency and gained snow capture, shade for cattle, and a line that kept March from stealing April. There was one problem: time and optics. The first 2 seasons are ugly. Residue looks messy. Green rows on planting day make neighbors raise eyebrows. Custom operators hate slowing down for belts and strips. Grain buyers don't care about infiltration rates. So breakers found community in places that offered it. Local soil health circles, field days where infiltration tests beat PowerPoints, farmer-led networks where failure stories were worth more than slogans. They borrowed drills, shared crimp rollers, and swapped seed mixes. They kept receipts. Meanwhile, something else started to shift: finance. A regional lender piloted a half-point interest cut for farms that documented cover crop acres and reduced tillage, backed by infiltration tests. It wasn't charity. Their default rates dipped in weather swings. An insurer shaved premiums for verified covers on soybeans. A grain buyer added a steady supply bonus if acres stayed in rotation and claims fell. Small moves, but money speaks. The treadmill relies on speed. Slow down the treadmill with cash for function, and more farmers step off. Impact showed up in quiet ways. Their kids stayed because the farm felt less like roulette. Springs got less frantic. A rainy week didn't wreck planting because soil carried traffic better. Power bills for pivots eased as the sponge rebuilt. In town, ditches ran clearer after storms. The co-op still did business, different products, different timing, but they were part of the shift, too, selling seed for covers, crimp rollers, and advice rooted in tests, not tradition. None of this is a miracle. It's boring compounding. Armor the soil, keep roots living, disturb less, add diversity, fold livestock where it fits. The breakers didn't flee modernity. They used it to make biology pay. The black wind still blows. It just finds fewer places to grab. Markets that reward soil, not just grain. The first buyer who walked onto Tom's place didn't ask about test weight. He asked to see the shovel. Tom smiled, drove it into a headland, and lifted a slice that held together in crumbs. The buyer nodded, pulled out a contract, and pointed to a line most farmers never see: premium tied to verified soil function, covers in, tillage down, infiltration up. Not charity, risk management. If Tom could deliver grain through heat spells with fewer claims and steadier moisture, the mill paid more for certainty. Here's how a market like that works. A processor needs corn in August regardless of weather. They've learned the hard way that brittle acres hiccup when storms stall or heat spikes, so they create a steady supply bonus tied to practices that reduce volatility. Farmers enroll acres, upload third-party verification, cover crop seed invoices, conservation plans, infiltration tests, and agree to light auditing at harvest. It's not paperwork for paperwork's sake, it's a receipt for resilience. Meanwhile, something else is happening upstream. Lenders want borrowers who won't need emergency extensions every time June turns weird. A regional bank rolls out a soil resilience rate, a quarter-point discount if farms hit simple marks, 2 years of cover crops, reduced till proof of rotation, a basic soil health assessment. Their actuaries aren't poets. They saw fewer delinquencies in drought counties when those practices were in place. Money moves when risk drops. Get this, insurance can be a market too. A carrier pilots a Green Acres endorsement, shave premiums where satellite imagery confirms cover crop biomass and residue cover after harvest. The logic is blunt: fewer prevent plant claims, less replant after crusting rains, lower hail loss where stalks stay healthier under cooler soils. They aren't paying for vibes, they're paying for claims they won't write. A micro story from a milling co-op. They ran out of local soft wheat after a soaked June. Trucks rolled from 3 extra states. Costs spiked. The next year, they offered a resilience premium to growers within 120 miles if they added a small grain plus clover into rotation and proved post-harvest ground cover by October. A dozen growers took the deal. The year after, 20. The co-op bought grain closer to home at a price that penciled against freight. Farmers made slightly less per acre on wheat, more per acre across the rotation. But there was one problem: verification without headaches. Farmers don't want a stranger counting rye stems, so programs leaned on simple, scalable proof. Satellite cover indices validated winter armor. Randomized in-field infiltration tests at field days created a shared standard, not a gotcha. Receipts and photos time-stamped practices. Some used conservation district techs, others hired independent crop consultants. Keep the friction low and the sign-ups grow. Unknown to most eaters, brands already fight supply volatility. A cereal company that touts sustainable grains can't afford an empty bin in August. They build soil-forward contracts in 2 tiers, base price plus a modest premium for verified covers and reduced till a bigger premium for added rotation diversity and livestock integration where feasible. They don't demand perfection on day one. They set a ramp and publish clear rules. Farmers like rules they can plan around. Meanwhile, carbon markets tried to crowd into the story with glossy numbers and complex registries. Some farmers bit, then soured when payments fell or baselines bit back. The lesson stuck: pay for agronomy, not just carbon accounting. Markets that last treat carbon as a co-benefit of water-holding capacity, yield stability, and erosion reduction. The check clears because the buyer gets supply security, not because a spreadsheet captures a ton they can't see. Get this, elevators can nudge behavior with micro-differentials. A 5-cent bump for corn delivered off fields with documented residue cover after soybeans. 2 cents for wheat with a verified legume under seed. A nickel for sorghum with prairie strips on contours. Tiny numbers, big signals. Over 1 million bushels, those pennies teach faster than speeches. A story from the Gulf. A grain buyer serving a port city got tired of annual nitrate headlines. They teamed with a watershed group and offered a pooled premium funded by downstream utilities. Farmers upstream installed bioreactors and buffers, planted covers, and reported practices. Utilities saw nitrate treatment costs ease in wet springs. The buyer secured goodwill and a steadier flow. Everyone paid less for the fix at the field edge than the filter at the pipe. Here's where it gets practical for a farm family. They map fields by risk: sand ridges that burn out, low spots that pond, slopes that sheet. They stack offers: a lender discount, an insurance shave, an elevator bump, a brand contract, until the bundle covers the transition dip. Year 1, they seed rye after corn where herbicide plans allow. Year 2, they add a small grain on the slope and underseed clover. Year 3, they graze covers on the sandy quarter. The premiums don't make them rich. They make change survivable. What nobody says out loud is that markets already reward soil. They just did it through forward-looking neighbors and whispered comps. The new version makes it explicit and portable. Put a price on the sponge. Pay the farm that delivers it. That's not a movement, that's procurement. The hard choices no one wants to say out loud. Here's the part that doesn't make the brochure. We can't save every acre for row crops. Some ground should stop pretending. Thin sands that burn out, side hills that sheet in every storm, saline flats that ghost yields. Keeping those in annual tillage is like bailing a leaky boat with a thimble. The choice isn't between profit and purity. It's between steady money on the right use, prairie strips, grazing, perennials, and slow financial bleed under corn and soy. Retire the worst 5% on each farm to perennial cover, and the other 95 gets easier to defend. Shelter belts need to come back, and not as nostalgia. Lines of trees cost minutes. They buy snowpack, shade, bird pressure on pests, and a surface windbreak that keeps March from carrying April away. The hard part is admitting the planter will have to lift. If we want the sponge, we have to tolerate friction. A county that pays for belt maintenance saves on road drifts and ditch cleanouts. A farm that keeps 3 belts in the teeth of the prevailing wind loses acres on paper and gains summers that don't end in insurance calls. We also have to be honest about water. There are circles on the high plains that should not be corn anymore. Not this price of diesel, not this recharge rate, not this aquifer curve. That doesn't mean abandoning families. It means paying for the transition with real checks, not speeches. Debt restructuring tied to crop mix, bridge payments for the first 3 years of sorghum rotations or grazing, and a power co-op rate that recognizes fewer peak irrigation hours as a public benefit. Keep pumping for maximum yield, and the circle goes dark. Scale irrigation to what the aquifer and soil can hold, and the town keeps a tax base. Next, crop insurance deadlines. They were written for an average spring that doesn't exist. If residue keeps fields drier and covers need a week longer, the calendar has to flex. Tie coverage to soil function verified by simple metrics: infiltration, residue cover, living roots, and allow termination windows that match biology, not bureaucracy. Farmers will take the deal if it's clear and fair. Agents can sell it if claims fall. Everyone wins except the storm. Then there's fertilizer. We know late-season nitrates flush down tiles. Pretending it's someone else's problem is how we got downstream bills. The fix is blunt. Shift a slice of nitrogen to in-season applications that match crop need, plant covers that drink the leftovers, install bioreactors on outlets, set watershed caps with carrots first, premium discounts, buyer bonuses, sticks later if nothing moves. This isn't punishment. It's aligning the invoice with the field edge where it starts. Equipment culture needs a reset. Width and speed solved labor and weather windows. They also flatten the landscape and the hedges that saved it. Dealers can lead with tools that protect structure, strip-till bars, crimp rollers, interceders, light tracks that float in April. Farmers can trade horsepower arms races for uptime in mud and armor on slopes. The hard truth, status isn't a header, it's fields that don't rill in a 2-inch rain. Land access is the quiet choke point. Absentee owners like clean views and top rents. Tenants chasing short leases won't invest in 5-year soil plans. The fix looks boring, lease addendums that pay for practice, $2 more per acre for documented covers, a bonus for reduced till multi-year terms that outlast the first ugly spring. Write it down, tolerate messy, bank on compounding. Without that, tenants will keep mining to survive. We've also got to talk about markets that aren't glamorous. Small grains, forages, grazing on cropland, these are not Instagram deals. They are how rotations widen and pests give up. Elevators can open a bin for local oats. Dairies can contract for forage that slots after wheat. A meat processor can put a fair price on grass-finished cattle that spent winter on covers. It's not ideology, it's logistics. If the truck has somewhere to go, the drill can plant something different. Policy has to stop paying twice for the same mistake. If public dollars underwrite premiums, they can expect risk reduction. Offer a ratchet, higher subsidies for verified soil health practices, standard rates for status quo, lower subsidies for choices that amplify claims. Not punitive, transparent. Pair it with transition grants that cover the dip. We already spend the money after disasters. Spend a fraction before. Finally, the culture shift. Coffee shop pride has to move from rows you could eat off to headlands that hold. Celebrate the ugly first year, the rye mat that looks wrong in April and right in July, the windbreak that steals seconds and saves seasons. Put infiltration tests on the wall, not just yield maps. Tell the stories where the numbers got quieter. Fewer claims, lower power bills, clearer ditches, calmer springs. The black wind isn't sentimental. It respects armor, so should we. The county that spelled it out. They didn't hold a rally, they printed a report. In a small Midwest county that everyone drives through and no one visits on purpose, the Conservation District pulled 5 years of numbers, stream turbidity after storms, nitrate spikes at the town plant, prevent plant claims, crop insurance payouts, road washouts, ditch cleanouts, yield maps from growers willing to share. They laid it side by side like a family photo album. The picture wasn't dramatic, it was obvious. Stakes were simple: the school budget, the co-op's winter payroll, and the next generation's reason to stay. The superintendent showed up because water bills were eating into textbooks. The road foreman showed up because his crew was spending July shoveling silt instead of fixing culverts. Farmers came because the spring had been mean, 2 ordinary rains that moved dirt like a flood. The banker came because 3 renewals had gotten tense. Action started with a shovel, not a speech. In May, they ran a line of infiltration tests across volunteer fields, tilled corn on corn, no-till with covers, strip-till, and a prairie strip that a skeptical landlord allowed on a slope. Stopwatches clicked. On covered ground, an inch vanished in under a minute. On the tilled slope, it ponded, then skated sideways. They filmed it with phones. At the stream gauge, turbidity jumped exactly when the stopwatch lagged. The county's first chart wrote itself. What nobody knew at the time was that the water plant had started logging hourly nitrate readings instead of daily. The new graph matched tile outlets like a heartbeat. After heavy fertilizer windows and bare fields, the pulses ran higher and lasted longer. The plant manager didn't preach. He put 2 lines on a slide: treatment cost per month, and the share of farm acres with winter cover on the watershed. The lines moved in opposite directions. He circled the intersection. Meanwhile, they ran a quiet audit of road costs. Every mile of ditch that filled with silt after storms got tagged with its upstream land use: bare, covered, prairie strip, shelter belt, margin. Patterns popped. 2 townships with old windbreaks and more cover acres needed half the cleanouts. The road foreman shrugged. Where there's armor, we don't shovel. It wasn't science to him, it was fewer backhoes. This was the moment everything changed for their insurer. The county's crop insurance agent agreed to pull anonymized claim data by township, prevent plant, replant, hail on lodged corn, drown out. The Conservation District overlaid it with residue cover maps from winter satellites. Loss ratios lined up with bare acres. Not every year, not every field. Enough to write a sentence: where the sponge stayed, the claims fell. Get this, no one asked anyone to farm like a brochure. They asked for math. The banker stood up and offered a quarter-point discount for documented cover crop acres and reduced tillage on renewals, verifiable by simple checks. The agent followed, a pilot premium shave where satellite imagery showed winter armor and spring residue. The elevator manager added a nickel a bushel for corn delivered off fields with covers ahead of soybeans during their tight August window if growers shared a basic conservation plan. Nobody clapped, they penciled. A micro-story sealed it. 3 days earlier, a farmer with a reputation for clean fields told how a March blow etched his south slope into fingers. He lost a quarter-inch. He seeded rye that week on half the farm. In June, a 2-inch rain hit. The rye side held, the bare side rilled. He brought 2 jars, one clear, one brown. He set them on the table. I've been paying for the brown jar for years. I didn't know it. But there was one problem: leases. Tenants said they couldn't seed covers on year-to-year ground without getting burned by a landlord chasing an extra $10 in rent. So the county attorney drafted a 1-page addendum, multi-year term, a small rent bump for documented covers and reduced till permission to leave residue messy, and a clause that let tenants recover a fraction of the cost if the lease ended early. 3 landlords signed in the room. 10 called the next day. Meanwhile, they brought back trees without nostalgia. The board created a shelter belt stipend, a small annual payment per maintained windbreak acre, funded by a slice of the ditch cleanout budget they expected to save. They mapped prevailing winds, marked 3-mile stretches where belts would catch snow and slow march. A few operators grumbled about boom width. The road foreman didn't. He wanted fewer drifts and less silt. Impact arrived that fall. The water plant's nitrate spikes after the first storm ran lower. The road crew logged fewer emergency callouts. The elevator paid out 27 resilience bonuses. The agent filed fewer prevent plant claims. The bankers' discount cost little and bought quieter renewal meetings. Nobody declared victory. They set dates: field day in April, shelterbelt sign-ups in June, lease clinic in August. In the aftermath, the superintendent ran a new line on the budget: sold to school. It wasn't a tax. It was a grant from the Conservation District funded by saved road work and utility costs, earmarked for ag science kits, rings, shovels, stopwatches, and a simple curriculum: measure the sponge. 5th graders showed up at the field day. They poured water. They cheered when it disappeared into a living crumb. The county didn't solve farming. It spelled out what worked and paid for it. The wind still blew. It just found fewer places to take. What we knew and when we knew it. Start with the first shovel of truth. Decades ago, researchers kept finding the same thing. When soil holds together like a chocolate cake, storms become water banks. When it powders like flour, storms become trucks. Field trials showed organic matter climbing in systems that kept living roots and reduced disturbance. In parallel plots, conventional tillage hit early yield highs, then needed more inputs to keep pace. The stopwatch and the bushel counter told different stories. Meanwhile, a different lab measured water, not grain. In infiltration tests, covered ground swallowed an inch in under a minute, bare ground glazed, then skated runoff downslope. Those weren't exotic trials. They were county plot days paid for by farmers and small grants. The math was simple. Every 1% organic matter increase added tens of thousands of gallons of water storage per acre. Lose a point, and you're buying that rain back with diesel and insurance. What nobody missed, though few said out loud, was the human timeline. A farmer can erode 1/10 of organic matter a year and still post record yields with the right weather. That lag fooled us. We celebrated harvest highs while the soil's savings account thinned. Then weather shifted, heat domes, stalled fronts, and the check bounced. It wasn't sudden, it was finally. We also knew the Dust Bowl wasn't just drought, it was management meeting weather. History books and agency reports blamed exposed soil and narrow rotations. The fix then was shelter belts, contouring, and getting grass back on fragile acres. For a while we listened. Then equipment got wider, herbicides masked rotation needs, and irrigation expanded. Trees came out, contours straightened. We traded time for speed. Get this, the water story was warned too. Groundwater studies called the Ogallala a fossil aquifer. Recharge was slow, extraction fast. Counties logged feet per year declines, not inches. Wells that once blasted sputtered. Farmers adjusted, nozzles dropped, pressures tweaked, but the trend line stayed unkind. The quiet memo read, irrigation is a bridge, not a foundation. At the same time, downstream monitors kept shouting. Watershed trials showed tiles moving clear water rich in nitrates after fertilizer windows, while brown surges followed storms off tilled slopes. Municipalities didn't need ideology to notice. They needed bigger filters and more coagulant. The invoices spelled it out. Runoff here equals treatment there. We also had the playbook for fixes. Farmer-led research networks reported practical wins: rye ahead of soy to suppress weeds and cool soils, multi-species covers after wheat to rebuild structure, livestock integrated to cycle nutrients and pay for seed, biofumigant brassicas reducing disease pressure and chemical exposure risks. It wasn't theory. It was side-by-side trials weighed on local scales. Policy had breadcrumbs too. Conservation programs funded buffers, covers, and rotational grazing. Every time adoption rose in a watershed, road crews logged fewer washouts and water plants logged lower spikes. Yet insurance, deadlines, and program rules often undercut timing that biology needed. We knew how to help. We wrote calendars that forgot weather moves. Finance saw signals before it learned the language. Loss ratios crept higher on bare landscapes in weird springs. Appraisals leaned on comps that didn't capture living function. Lenders noticed renewals tightening after clusters of bad weather years. Markets priced volatility as climate, not as climate plus management. A micro-story made the pattern plain. 2 fields, same soil series, same rain. One no-tilled with a 5-year cover history soaked an inch in minutes and held green through a hot spell. The tilled one shed water, crusted, then demanded a replant after a pounding rain. Harvest bushels tied. The following spring, the crusted field rilled again, the covered field didn't. The outcome wasn't an accident, it was memory. What we knew early, often and locally, was that soil is infrastructure. It stores water, filters nutrients, buffers heat and cold, anchors roots and resists wind. We also knew this. The fixes compound slowly and pay reliably, while the damages compound quickly and bill everyone. The choice was never mystical. It was practical. Armor, roots, less disturbance, diversity, livestock where it fits, and belts where wind runs. The data didn't whisper. It spoke with shovels, stopwatches, and water bills. The last memo is the hardest. We can't metric our way out with yield alone. We have to measure and reward the sponge. We've tested the pieces, watched them work, and seen communities bank the savings. What we knew is enough to act. What we waited for cost us time we don't get back. The ground decides. Keep the sponge and the hum of summer endures. Lose it and the balance sheet frays in silence. If this rang true, watch the next story on towns that paid upstream instead of downstream. Subscribe to see the playbook farmers are using now, and share this with one person who signs checks when it rains.